Welcome to episode 75 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, joining you from Denver International Airport this week. And joining me again is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with my first topic. Vodafone recently announced an expansion of their fiber partnerships. They've been partnered with BT OpenReach for a while, but they recently announced an announcement with CityFibre. And what Vodafone claims this will do will give them an 8 million home coverage footprint in a dozen major cities in the UK. And they're boasting that this will be the largest than any other provider. BBC actually contacted me this week. There may be an article that they're posting at any moment and wanted me to weigh in on this. And I think it's quite compelling from the perspective of the fact that Vodafone has also been investing obviously quite heavily in 5G. And certainly if they augment this fiber footprint with fixed wireless access services for those parts of the UK, which there are quite a few that are underserved by fiber, this could really position them well in the mobile broadband market. What are your thoughts, buddy?
Well, Vodafone doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure advantage that BT does,
Mm-hmm.
because BT is a traditional telecom and has decades of building their own fiber networks, and having a much larger footprint, especially when they acquired EE. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think this is a good thing for Vodafone because they need to um, broaden their network's capabilities. And to your point, um, there's also a chance that they could use some of this fiber to help build out their 5G network.
Mm-hmm.
Build once, serve twice, and
Mm-hmm.
possibly even fixed wireless, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a net positive. I'm definitely a proponent of fiber. I used to have fiber at home, and I dearly miss it, and I will very soon have it once again. So I just think fiber is the way forward, and we're clearly seeing other operators going down the same path, realizing that just fiber is the future, whether people like it or not.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I like the fact that Vodafone has been very focused on discrete service delivery, and they're looking beyond just the traditional, their traditional 5G deployment. So this will be interesting to keep tabs on. But let's move to your first topic this week, and RootMetrics has published another report, and they provide some insight on T-Mobile, right?
Yeah, so they're doing the three big carriers: T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that we've got RootMetrics, we've got OpenSignal, we've got Ookla, and generally they have different test methodologies because they have different ways of gathering data. And in many cases, they have different weighting systems. So it's always really good to kind of wait and see what all the three big speed testing companies say about networks before really making um, assumptions of what the state of 5G is amongst American carriers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but basically, this RootMetrics study came out and basically said that T-Mobile absolutely walloped the competition on speed,
Mm-hmm.
and has significantly improved its reliability, and already leads in coverage and availability. So, they were saying that it's there was like a data, they have like this whole PDF where they go through and talk through the 60 recently tested cities,
Mm-hmm.
and they're basically saying that T-Mobile is just momentum and just keeps moving forward, and that they're the only carrier to exceed 100 or 200 megabits um,
Mm-hmm.
in their testing, and they're basically saying that for the foreseeable future, they expect T-Mobile to continue this momentum, which is exactly in line what you and I have been saying since the beginning of this year.
Mm-hmm.
That T-Mobile's mid-band rollout is fast, it's aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
and it's significantly improving the company's speeds, compared to where they were when they were just using low band for 5G.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only narrowed the gap, it has blown through the gap and blown past the gap. Um, And it'll be really interesting to see what will happen once T-Mobile, gets their mid-band coverage close to where their low band is,
Mhm.
because that will be, the critical point of critical mass for their mid-band network.
I didn't dig into it, and I plan to, but from your perspective, does standalone factor into this as well when you look at those 60 major metros?
I don't think so.
Okay.
My understanding is that currently T-Mobile's low band network is standalone, but its mid band network is not quite yet.
Okay.
So I think that standalone will be the next phase once I think T-Mobile sees that they've got enough critical mass on coverage, which is why I think that Verizon and AT&T are holding back on their deployments of standalone,
Hmm.
because I think they want to flip that on once they've got enough mid-band coverage to justify it.
That makes sense. Well, let me move to my second topic this week. I'm actually going to double down on Open RAN, and I'll also mention, if you follow my Twitter feed, I'll be hosting a panel on Open RAN next week with the E5G event. That's on Tuesday. But let me start with my first of two Open RAN topics. This week, Germany announced a $350 million or €300 fund they're going to dedicate towards Open RAN projects. And so my question is it enough to move the needle? In the details here, it's Germany's Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure. That's quite a mouthful. And what they're stating
Try
is
saying it in
that
German.
exactly, I won't even try. But what they're stating is that this is really focused on the manufacturing industry, and that's no surprise.
Right.
Some of the German automobile manufacturers are the first to be deploying cellular private networking in the manufacture of automobiles. And so I really view this as Germany's opportunity to continue to extend their momentum. Germany, if you don't follow Germany, and I know you're very familiar with the German market, they're very tech savvy. They tend to be very early adopters. So I'm not surprised to see this. So it's interesting. That investment's going to be broken down into a number of different areas. One, a test lab. Two, testbed city rollouts in two cities that I probably can't even pronounce. Not Nuremberg, but Brandenburg and Plauen. And then and then there's some individual research projects that are going to be earmarked as well. So I really like the fact that they've broken this down and they're looking at sort of different factors, and that they're focused on manufacturing, which is certainly one of Germany's strengths. So wondering if you have any input here.
I would say that, because Open RAN is more of a greenfield deployment,
Hmm.
at least nowadays, right? That's what we're looking at it for.
Right.
That's definitely more of an enterprise play, and it allows for commodity hardware and, custom tailored solutions through software. And truly, Germany is, the manufacturing hub of Europe.
Hmm.
They make planes, trains, and automobiles,
Hmm.
as well as
Love
all
that
kinds
movie,
of.
by the way. It's almost around the corner here with Thanksgiving.
But they also, they make tons of other precise equipment that could absolutely benefit from having faster internet connectivity between equipment, engineers. There's no limit to what having more bandwidth can do when you're in an industrial application.
Hmm.
So I think it's absolutely a rational thing for Germany to be trying to incentivize this to roll through faster, and to do it at a lower cost, right? Because there's so many different types of factories and so many different types of industries in Germany that could benefit
Sure.
from it. That
Ab-
you know, it's inevitable, I think, but I think they're just trying to speed up the inevitable.
Absolutely. Continue that momentum, the wind beneath their wings. Let's move to your second topic this week. And you reported on this last week about the pause on C-band rollouts due to some FAA, not FCC concerns. And you want to provide an update.
Yeah. So basically, what's happening is the aviation industry is, um, pushing for more delays beyond the 1 month delay that we recently talked about last week.
Hmm.
And it sounds like they want more testing to be done And I have a feeling that this is most likely a push to get funding to get these replacements done. The one thing that really kind of makes this whole argument fall flat on its face is that the airline industry knew about this well before this auction happened. They had a
Right.
study in place over a year ago, and the data they collected is happened over a year and a half ago. They didn't use commercial networks to test this or commercial equipment; they simulated it. So I think there's a lot that needs to be figured out. But from the conversations that I've had with people, it doesn't sound like there was much communication between the aviation industry, the FAA, and the carriers. And it seems like um, the airline industry is trying to um, make sure that they get their way. And at this point, the FAA hasn't made any clear commitments one way or the other, but it just uh, doesn't. Based on my reading of the 200-page document that they are basing their request for delay, it doesn't really seem like the existing bans that are being released this year will even really be part of the issue. It
Hmm.
only seems like the higher bands are the ones that could potentially create problems.
Hmm.
But just replacing um, the filters on these airplanes would solve the problem. That's a cost issue, and we'll see what happens. But there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of people who don't really understand what spurious emissions are,
Hmm.
and how they can affect an airplane's ability to measure its altitude while it's landing, which ultimately is the main issue here.
Sure.
Because at altitude, this is not an issue. It's only really a problem closer to the ground near the airport. So
Hmm.
um, we'll see what happens, but I think this is a very unfortunate situation, and it doesn't really help Verizon or AT&T, who should be, rolling the spectrum out within the next 30 days, and now they're pushing it back to next year by a month. So
Yeah.
um, we'll see what happens, but it's just it doesn't really feel like it's necessarily something that feels extremely justified and is very clear in its danger.
You know what it feels like to me? It feels like sort of those Facebook hearings where, Zuckerberg was being interviewed and it kind of blew me away, the lack of technical acumen that a lot of our elected leaders have. Do you think that this is part of it as well, that this is a lack of understanding and education?
I think there's a lack of um, I think it's not a lack of education as much as I think it's a lack of communication.
Okay.
Um, because the group who was put in charge of doing this testing and writing up this report is an aviation group.
Okay.
They didn't even try to ask for the carriers or any of the carrier groups to participate in this
Input.
report.
Interesting.
So I think that's a big problem because it's like, they're creating policy based on information that I believe is incomplete and
Hmm.
does not include those stakeholders who spent up almost $90 billion for spectrum
Right.
and have almost no say in whether or not they're able to use it, which
Hmm.
it's kind of crazy to me. And the other thing is, if the government took in that $90 billion and they're also paying for clearing, in addition to that, why can't some of that money be used to pay for this? I don't understand it.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Yeah,
um,
I agree.
that's my issue with it, because I'm really glad that the government's able to collect all this money for the spectrum, and it's very valuable. But it why wasn't there a fund set aside to make the airliners solve this problem? It just doesn't make sense to me.
I would agree, and that's great insight that you provided, that the operators were not involved in any sort of due diligence before the FAA decided to do what they did. But this will be interesting. We're going to definitely keep our eyes and ears open on it. Let me move to my third and final topic this week. It is Open RAN. Orange opened an RAN integration center, and it happened this week. And they've invited a number of different partners to participate with them. It's near Paris, and the objective is just to ensure interoperability. And one of the big standouts for me was a partnership with Samsung Networks from a RAN perspective. And certainly, I think historically, when you look at the incumbent providers of RAN solutions, Ericsson and Nokia come to mind, not necessarily Samsung, but from my perspective, Samsung is really stepping up its game. We've talked about how their design wins with Verizon early in Verizon's 5G deployment really signaled their first step out of their core Korean and Asian market. And so, from my perspective, here's another announcement that really points to the momentum that Samsung Networks is building behind its portfolio. And one of the superpowers that I think it brings to the table relative to its European competitors is how deep it is within semiconductor manufacturing, automotive, all of these different vertical industries where they have some tribal knowledge around use cases and applications. And I'm not saying that Nokia and Ericsson don't, but Samsung brings, I think, a different element to the table. And so I continue to be impressed with their momentum. I don't know if you caught this announcement, but would love to get your insight on
I saw it, but I didn't really look into it too much.
it.
Partially because you're a resident Open RAN guy,
Sure.
um, but also because it's another win for Samsung. Um, and yeah, I mean they've really the thing that I'll say is Open RAN didn't really feel like it was a part of what they were trying to do initially.
Hmm.
But it seems like Samsung has been listening to their customers and are trying to, expand into areas of infrastructure where their customers need them to be. It seems
Hmm.
like Samsung has created competition in the market that otherwise may not have been there. That said, Huawei is still um, not present in a lot of these markets,
Right.
so it's a good thing that Samsung has, you know, picked up the baton in some of these regions and is offering solutions, and is giving Ericsson and Nokia a run for their money.
I agree. You mentioned Huawei. They've been on the sidelines with respect to Open RAN beyond their current challenges. And there was actually, I read just before we got on the call here that the Biden administration sort of signed the death warrant with Huawei and ZTE, basically ruling out any opportunity for them to deploy in the US. We may save that for another podcast, but let's move to your third and final topic this week. And it's XR themed. You are our XR mixed reality, VR, AR expert, and you want to talk about Qualcomm, Deutsche Telekom, DoCoMo, and T-Mobile, right?
Yeah, so I was at a conference called AWE this week, which is also known as Augmented World Expo, and it's kind of an XR conference. And at that conference, Qualcomm announced its new Snapdragon Spaces XR platform, which is basically a way to enable smartphone developers to take their existing AR apps and to add, or their existing apps and to add AR features to them, and to enable them to also allow for AR headsets to be connected to the phone and use that capability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a change of strategy for Qualcomm. They're a very big player in the 5G space. So naturally, they've also partnered with a bunch of content developers to create content using this new platform, as well as partnerships with operators from around the world, including Deutsche Telekom, NTT DoCoMo, and T-Mobile,
Mm-hmm.
to essentially make this platform the default for their XR services and their XR programs, so that when a developer wants to roll something out, they start with the Spaces platform as their default. That said, Spaces is compatible only with Qualcomm Snapdragon devices, so
Mm-hmm.
iOS is out of the question, and anything based on say MediaTek or Samsung also won't work. But in the US, that's less of a concern since most Android phones run on Snapdragon in the US.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That said, the new Pixel 6 won't run on this either. So there are some users who will not be able to take advantage of this new this new XR platform that enables AR applications both on the phone and in the headset. But it's just good to see that they've managed to come to market very aggressively, and they already have some of the biggest carriers in the world already on board to embrace this with whatever applications they choose to um, offer to their customers.
Good stuff. Anything else you want to add there on the lines of DoCoMo and T-Mobile?
I would say that they're not the only ones that are involved. There's smartphone vendors like Xiaomi and Oppo who are also partners, as well as Lenovo and Motorola. In
Mhm.
fact, the Motorola Think Reality A3, which is an AR headset, is the kind of like default development device that Qualcomm is recommending. So that when people want to develop AR glasses applications using this Snapdragon Spaces platform, they can use an already existing Lenovo headset, which I just so happen to already have on my desk.
Nice. You get all the nice toys, my friend.
But yeah, it's a big deal because Google has been very absent in the space, and somebody has needed to take hold and create something that developers can rely on and has enough critical mass that allows them to make applications profitably. And the important thing here is Qualcomm's not trying to create a new game engine or a new way for development because they already have partnerships with Epic, Unity, and Niantic. So this is kind of
Mhm.
something that you would build on top of. You wouldn't necessarily be starting with this as the basis of everything that you're doing, but it's something that enables you to have hand tracking and a bunch of other features because Qualcomm just bought two companies to fold into this to
Mhm.
make it as capable as it is. So I think it's gonna necessarily make some big improvements in the uptake of AR and 5G together.
Yeah, and I've talked to some of the use cases there with field service, and it's quite compelling. I've seen some Qualcomm demos, and I'm actually looking forward. I'll be at a Qualcomm event in New York City next week, learning it maybe about this subject, but likely
I'll be
other.
there.
Yeah, you'll be there as well, and maybe we can do a little recording while we're there at the event and share that with our listeners and viewers. But hey, buddy, this has been another great podcast. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Whaletown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Saad. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune again next week.